Most people underestimate the power of process. They stick it in the back seat and forget about it until it's too late. But they shouldn't. Processes run the world, literally all of it. Stocked supermarkets, on-time trains, and safely landing planes are all made possible by systems of intricate, interlinked processes. They are the secret sauce of every great company, and HR teams are responsible for some of the most important processes of all. Onboarding employees, building teams, crafting culture. These vital systems are the lifeblood of every organization. That's why this episode is brought to you by Process Street, the process platform of choice for HR teams around the world. Process Street is a no-code platform that lets you transform your most important HR processes into powerful workflows. Design beautiful employee onboarding experiences with extreme engagement that increase inclusion and reduce turnover. Sync tasks into Slack or Microsoft Teams, automate emails, handoffs, and so much more. Thousands of teams, large and small, trust Process Street to manage their most important people processes. Like Salesforce, that used Process Street to onboard all the 3,000 Slack employees after the $27 billion acquisition. You can learn more and sign up for a free account at www.process.st. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. The podcast all about the delicate balance between people and business, and quite literally reconnecting the two. My name is Tracy Rubin, and I've spent nearly my entire professional career in HR. Join me as I share stories, opinions, and words of advice with you each week. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast. I have with me a really exciting guest who is going to challenge the way that you and I have all been thinking. Markus Neukom spent more than 20 years working with managers and professionals that are struggling to perform or progress in the workplace, many reaching the point they either reluctantly leave or increasingly, sadly, are fired. But it is not for their lack of expertise that is failing them, and many only reach out for help when they are desperate, redundant, or on the brink of being fired. Now, I share this because I think it sets us up for a really wonderful discussion. Markus has an extensive background in HR, but in a pathway that is different than many guests that I've had on the podcast. And Markus is going to challenge the status quo, which you all know if you've been listening to the podcast for a while. This is something I love to do. And I think we're going to have a really nice discussion that allows us to think about HR and people centrism differently. So right before we get into that, I'm going to bring Markus on and we'll hear a little bit more about Markus. So without further ado, here is Markus. Hello, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Well, first of all, I know that you are not based in the US. So why don't you tell us where you are recording or calling in from and how you kind of started out your career journey and what you do today?
That is correct. I'm actually coming in from Switzerland, from the eastern part. I'm in my office right now. And thinking about my career, it's actually really interesting because, I started out in recruiting and I really loved it. And then almost by chance, I received a job offer to become a human resources manager. I took that offer, which was really amazing as well. And I had how shall I say that? A very special experience with one of the leading managers from operations. And he said to me, Markus, welcome on board. Why should we work with you? What makes you different to all of the others that came through this door? And that was actually quite a startling question for me and a starting point for me to think. So I said to him, look, I am HR and my philosophy is not staying at the ivory tower, but my philosophy is managing by walking around. And that definitely piqued his interest. And then I said to him, look, in the end, it's all about me helping you to help your managers to do the best job. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to support you. And he nodded and said, let's do it. So this was my starting point in HR, really.
That's amazing. I totally agree with that. I mean, I know I shared with you that I started my career in retail, and that was everything that you just said about really leading from the floor, that it's not just about leading from the front, but it's also about leading through the people who are impacting your business or your organization. It's not the people at the top who are impacting the organization the way that it is the people who are the faces of the organization, right? And I think this is a common misconception and something easily forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
So, Markus, for all the listeners, Markus and I connected a few months ago. And what I found to be really interesting about our conversation was that we were talking about this idea of people centrism not necessarily being owned by HR. And I was fascinated by this because you made me think differently about even what I believe. And I'm pretty firm in my beliefs. Like, it takes a lot to convince me otherwise. But what was so interesting about this is that you were talking about how managers, frontline managers, are actually like the quote unquote owners in some way of people centrism and humanism in work. And I'd love for you to expand on this because it really made me think differently about how I even talk about people centrism.
It is actually a very crucial topic. And let me start like this. What I've realized with all the managers I worked with, they agree that people centrism should be in management, should be in the line. But because they don't really know what to do, what do? They delegate it to HR. And it is so easy for them to, point the finger to HR and say HR doesn't do its job. But all of them I've worked together agree with me, Markus, people centrism should be at least as much in our lanes as it is with HR. So that was really a turning point for myself because, I actually grew up as well believing that HR is human first and then not much else, and then sometimes resources, but it's all about human, right? Mm-hmm. And it actually all changed when I began teaching. I started teaching personnel development to HR people. And my first question was to those, were all women. And I asked them, how do you understand human resources? And they said, people-centric, development, making sure that people feel good, helping people to develop. And then I said, have a look at the word human resources management. And it's not so much romanticism behind it, really, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that was that one point which you started thinking as well, because human resources management, in the end, it's really about managing human resources to the best ability for the company. And if it does help the employee, it's absolutely wonderful. But to all the managers I spoke with, it was very evident that they said, look, human resources is about the resources which we have to allocate to the best of our goals to achieve our objectives. So that was definitely the point where HR got a bit de-romanticized for myself.
Yeah. I think this is where my mind starts to go a million miles a minute, because I think about my career in HR, and I'm sure that there are listeners out there who are starting to think about their careers people have always been at the center of that. And especially coming up through like an HR manager, HR business partner career pathing for myself, it's all people all the time, because you're solving people challenges, people issues, or you're supporting the business in solving those challenges. So I guess one of the things that I'm thinking about initially is there are a lot of stigmas out there that I talk about a lot on the podcast, but that especially come out in social media through different articles that we're seeing criticizing HR folks, managers, companies, and everything in between, that these representatives of companies, whether they're in HR or other business leaders, don't have the best interest of people in mind. Now, thinking about what you've just said and, the perspective that I know you have around what people centrism really means and that everyone owns it, but especially an employee's manager. And we'll get into that. What do you say to those stigmas, understanding those perspectives that you do have? But what do you say to those people who believe that the business leaders only have the business intention in mind?
Provocatively, rightfully so.
So do you agree then that business leaders are truly only focused on the business, or do you think there is a happy medium between both people and business?
I would definitely not say only, but I would say first off, because you see, I'm an entrepreneur, and if we look at the responsibility of an entrepreneur and the objective of running a company is profit. If we don't run a company successfully and we don't achieve profit, we can close HR very soon and we can close pretty much everything soon, right? So that's where I'm a little bit controversial, I would say.
Yeah. I definitely would say so. I think my devil's advocate approach to this, or if I were to play devil's advocate, I would say, well, if you focus on your people who are running the business, then actually you don't really have to think about the business as much. If you're taking care of people and you enable them to feel productive and happy, and you commit and invest in their professional development, then actually you can drive the business through your people. So what would you say to that?
I 100% agree, Tracy. And now I believe we have hit the conundrum.
Yes.
When we talk about managers, should be in charge of the whole people centrism and developing their people, I believe the biggest challenge is that so many managers simply don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I believe that's where we have the problem. And HR often is way too far away from the departments. Because, their job is not doing the management, but walking around and basically being present in the departments all the time, grassroots and, listening to the whispers. So that would be management's job.
Yeah.
And that's where I say those people who say what you just said are 100% correct, 100%. I fully agree. But at the same time, unfortunately, because managers often don't know what to do and how to do it, that's why it ends up in a disaster. Mm-hmm. Because you see, if a manager really knows how to develop their people, right? That's exactly what you're saying. Then we have an ideal circumstance. And I believe that's the goal of what I'm doing professionally. Right. In short, I basically help those managers who knock at my door to help them to become better managers so they actually can lead their employees with emotional intelligence, with enthusiasm. Because I believe you agree, if you don't have that innately as a manager, you cannot expect your employees to be different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really good point. When I think about, some of the best leaders that I've ever worked with that are not in HR, they have always had really strong abilities to coach, develop, and manage their teams. Mm-hmm. And those who have always struggled to be leaders, and I say leaders very specifically, I'm not calling them managers, because I do think that when you sign up to be a manager, you actually are signing up to be a leader. And that is because society, as we know it, and I fully align with this, does not appreciate the manager that doesn't care about the person. Yeah. There is no room for that person anymore in, 90% of business. Now, of course, there's always that business out there that's going to say, we don't really care. We just want someone who's going to get the job done. And as long as that's the perspective, then that type of manager, not a leader, will survive and probably thrive. But I would probably go ahead and say that 90% of businesses don't actually want that, because it's not good for business to have that type of person in a position of power and leadership. So all of that to say, I think a great way to kind of bring all of these points that you've made together is that we are saying here now that HR can't be the function or the leader that is solely driving people centrism. There has to be an ownership from people who are leading and managing teams. So in your experience, I know that you're doing this every single day, essentially. Where do you start with someone who needs to be able to lead and manage and develop their team, but maybe doesn't have the skill set? Like, where do you start with that person as a blank slate?
Pretty much by their self-perception, and actually help them to understand what leading really means. And at the same time, to show them, some of them are like really hardcore managers, and they come to me because they want to become better leaders. Then I have leaders as well who mistake management by micromanaging. And I truly believe there has to be a balance between managing and leading. Because I don't think that with leading itself, we would actually achieve the objectives which we have to achieve. So, but it pretty much comes down to self-reflection, and then basically look at certain situations where they fail, where they feel they could be better, and then literally helping them to gain a new perspective for their employees, to better understand the employees, and then step by step to go deeper and deeper.
Yeah. As you were saying this, I was
clarity. Sorry.
No, yeah. As you were saying this, I was thinking about the self-awareness gap, because there is a huge gap in people who are truly self-aware. And I think I was just looking it up. I think it's like 10 to 15%. I remember hearing about 15% back in a leadership training course that I had taken a few years back. So there's no real way for us to know how many people are truly self-aware, because, statistics prove a point that you are trying to make. But let's just say that 10 to 15% of the leadership population across the world is actually self-aware. They know who they are. They know how they act. They know their pitfalls and their strengths. What happens with that other 90 to 85%? How do we start with self-awareness and perception if potentially more than 70% of people don't actually have an ability to be self-aware in that way? Are they just not the right fit for management or leadership?
No, I would say they absolutely are. And you see, it actually comes down to self-awareness again. So we have to make them aware that they might believe that they are self-aware, but that they're actually not self-aware.
Right.
So I believe it comes down to education.
Yeah.
Literally. What we're doing right now will definitely serve, hopefully, that some managers will hear that and realize, you see, basically when a client comes to me, they're mostly driven by one question. Is this as good as it gets? Or is there more? And the beauty of my work is really to give a resounding yes, and I can show you how to get to the more.
Right.
Because, there's so many managers out there, they are not satisfied with what they're doing.
Yeah.
And, I never really believed totally in statistics, which I haven't made myself.
I know. Statistics tell the story you want to tell,
Exactly.
You can always make it work. Yeah.
Yeah. But I definitely believe that the maturity really suffers in the area of self-awareness. That's for sure. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in, right?
Absolutely.
If you're not understanding yourself, how can you imagine to understand your employees?
Yeah.
If you never learn to communicate, how do you think you can convey your messages believably and, so they really understand what you want to say? It all starts with the manager itself. It's very funny. Sometimes they come to me with examples and ask, how shall I reprimand my employee, or what kind of sanctions should I use? I said, let's stop there. I'm not so much interested in the symptoms. I'm not so much interested in actually taking care of the symptoms. I'm interested in looking at the cause of it. And I challenge them and say, look, probably 95% of all the things you come up with are caused by yourself. And that's where self-awareness starts, right?
It's 1,000% true. And again, as you were saying this, I was thinking about how when we're talking about managers, and everyone listening needs to remember this. It is probably the most important thing that anyone wanting to be a manager needs to think about. That you are going to do your own job and you're going to be doing another job in managing, leading, developing, coaching, supporting your team. This is not your job changes and now you're just overseeing things. No, there is not enough payroll in the world for that. You are doing a job and you're doing another job. And I have a lot of conversations with leaders every day. And I always have my entire career because I'm in HR and I am in the business of helping leaders become better leaders and managers. And it doesn't matter where in HR I sit, that is always my focus, because the better the leadership can be, the better the employees can be. And I think this is kind of what we're beginning to really kind of crack the shell on, that it is through management and leadership, because I agree, I think they are different. Leadership is very influential and it can be really inspiring and motivational, and management can sometimes be a little bit tough, maybe some tough love, a little bit more direct, right? So there is a place for both. But when I think about some of the recent conversations that I've had with leaders across different industries, there is always this underlying conversation that I don't know, I don't feel like I'm in a good place with this employee, or I just want to, I want to move through this employee. It's not working out. And there's really nothing that grinds my gears more than that, because you have a human being who you have either hired, you were promoted and now you're managing them. They have a family, they have career goals. Maybe they are performing, just not at the standard that you want yet. You have invested time, energy, money, company money, everything, right? Why are people disposable? Why are we moving through someone just because they're not fitting the bill that you have designed? And this is also, I would say, the essence of humanity, that we care about people and we also care a lot about ourselves, and probably more so the latter. So when we step into manager roles, we have an expectation for ourselves. We have an expectation for our teams. And sometimes we have to change our expectations. Sometimes we have to actually change the way that or the vision that we have. And I've been a symptom of this problem too, like jumping into a leadership role and having all of these goals and dreams in mind, but not taking the time to think about who is going to get there, who completes the team. And you can't reasonably, if you are someone that cares about people, you cannot reasonably take that team and say, you're either going to fit this or you're going to leave, because that's just not people-centric. So this comes back to your point that you originally made to me on that first call that we had outside of this recording, that it's the manager that really drives people-centrism. And so I really would love to dig into that a little bit further. I saw you nodding your head in agreement, presumably. So why don't I pass it to you and allow you to kind of expand on that?
No, my nodding was absolutely sincere, and I'm all with you. You see, the thing is, many managers I work with, they somehow became managers believing that managing and leadership is an innate talent. Anyone who wants to manage and lead can lead. The problem is, why wouldn't I have been hired as a manager if I wouldn't have the qualities required to do my job well? That's where we have a systematic problem. You see, a manager and a leader isn't born. Yes, there are some really amazing examples where you can say they probably grew up with a huge amount of emotional intelligence, for example. But I believe most managers believe an old tale, which is simply not true. That if I am appointed a manager, that means I have what it takes. And you see, when we talk about recruiting, I believe most mistakes that really happen can be traced down to a not so ideal recruitment. And the thing is, like, this revolving door. I hire someone, I have to fire them. I hire someone, I have to fire them. I hire someone, I have to fire them. And no one really questions why.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is really, if we go down to the cause of the issue, it's mostly the inability of the manager to really hire.
Yep.
As well, I have so many managers say, Markus, what about this hiring process? It's logic. I say, yeah, you wish. You wish. And you see, as a former HR manager myself, I just turn the table and I just do a little mock interview with them. So they immediately realize, gosh, maybe my quality isn't that par as I thought it is, So I believe it really starts with educating management and leadership that they have to start with themselves, not because they're bad people at all. If I hear, friends, for example, who work for a micromanager, I say to them, hey, micromanager is not a bad person.
Right.
She or he literally doesn't know better.
Right.
But you see, if HR, and remember our conversation, I love HR. And if HR is able to do that management by walking around, helping the managers to develop, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That said, unfortunately, my experience and many of my fellow consultants is slightly different.
Yeah.
When we hear about the case, I just like to share with you that one example. I heard about the case where management really struggled. And through a contact of mine, I was able to reach out to HR and place an offer. And it got denied. And I had a chat with my contact later. And he said, look, I've been giving it some thought. And what it really comes down to is HR understands it would be their job to help me help my managers. But because they are not able to do it or don't have time enough, they will never let someone like you into the company because they would have to admit that they are not really doing their job.
Wow.
That was a tough eye opener.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I met a few of those companies. And that's actually why I changed my strategy and go in through management directly.
Wow.
Because, HR shouldn't feel like we failed if management isn't really performing. I believe the ideal HR clients of mine are the ones who say, hey, we work with you to achieve a much better result. And yes, we might have shortcomings in certain aspects, but it's just not our forte.
Hey everyone, I wanted to take a quick break to tell you about the Employee Onboarding Podcast by Process Street. If you care about crafting a magical experience for new employees and you love podcasts, you won't want to miss this. Join the Process Street team as they have conversations with people leaders and technology creators exploring the world's most magical onboarding experiences. You will learn cutting-edge best practices, industry secrets, and technology to wow every new employee that walks through your door. I recommend the episode where Process Street's CEO, Vinay Patankar, sat down with Zapier's CEO, Wade Foster, to talk about how they've scaled employee onboarding in a $5 billion remote-first organization, and the conversation with Ben Eubanks discussing how to leverage AI and automation to improve the new employee experience will blow your mind. You can find the Employee Onboarding Podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Go ahead and check it out, and don't forget, if you're interested in supercharging your employee onboarding or other HR processes, go ahead and give Process Street a try. You can sign up for a free account at www. This episode is brought to you by Namely. Running HR for a mid-sized business means you need software that can keep up with all you do, so you can focus on strategy, culture, and keeping your employees happy. You need Namely, the all-in-one HR solution that makes life easier for your employees, your boss, and you. Namely's HR platform covers your essential HR and compliance needs in one place. Whether you have 50 or 1,000 employees, Namely's all-in-one integrated platform is designed to be used by everyone, every day. With a mobile app and elegant UI, Namely lets employees request PTO, appreciate peers, review their pay stubs, and even answer their own HR questions. Namely offers it all. From onboarding and payroll to time tracking, benefits, employee engagement, and so much more. You'll finally have the time and data you need to drive the initiatives your company really cares about. I want you to simplify your HR processes with Namely, so I've arranged a special offer for my listeners. Right now, get a free month of unlimited access to Namely's all-in-one HR platform, but only when you go to namely.com/humanhr. Remember, for your free month, go to namely.com/humanhr. That's really interesting. This brings me back to something that one of my former leaders, bosses, had said to many people that kind of came through and through her office and said, I want to be in HR. I really want to impact the culture. And actually, you would love speaking to her for this point, or because of this point. And she was always like, if you want to impact the culture and you want to impact change, you've got to be a manager. And I know you're like, yes, that's it. There were moments where I was like, but I impact culture, but because like this is
you do. The company's culture.
The company, right. But when you're talking about a team's culture, a team's engagement, and which I always see it as like building blocks. Every single team has to have strong culture and a positive work experience in order to enable the company to have a strong company culture. You can't have one without the other. And I know that we've talked about too, how there are all of these silos that operate. And this is where if you have a manager that's really committed to a great experience for their employees, to the culture, to development, and all of those things, that's where the company can really start to thrive. So this was something that she said. And after reflecting on this years ago, I was like, you know what? She is right. We don't own it. It's everyone that owns it. And I know from our first conversation, we talked about this, that managers often want to delegate culture and engagement to HR. And when you said that to me, I wrote it down specifically because I was thinking about how, and I might have even mentioned this to you, how through DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, focuses, which have certainly taken a huge stance since 2020, especially, that now we're seeing these positions cropping up. Manager of DE&I, culture. I'm a director of employee engagement. And it makes you think, well, why should there be a position within HR when actually everyone owns that? So then it brings up this conversation around, well, does creating a position create hyper awareness? Does the position need to sit outside of HR in order for people to understand that this is not an HR problem or an HR challenge, but this is actually an organizational challenge and problem and focus? And I am of the belief that actually, especially DE&I roles, need to sit at an organizational level, not an HR level, because again, everyone owns how their teams are diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
I agree.
Anyway, I think, and I'm glad to hear that. I think I do want to pass it to you just in this perspective that, take us through that journey. How are managers, one, delegating and kind of passing this off to HR, and how do we fix that? Because I totally agree, and we have to make a change there. Everyone needs to own it.
I gladly do that. I'd like to add something before, which just came to mind when you talked about your former boss. I had a later conversation with that one head of operations quite some time later after I got hired. And he said to me, Markus, if you really want to make a change in this company, you have to leave HR and you have to become a manager in operations. So that literally seconds what you just said. He said you would have to leave HR and you would have to become a manager in operations, because that's where the work really gets done. So the other thing is, I think I said it to you in quite similar words. Most managers are actually glad to know that HR believes that they have the ownership of people-centrism. And they do that with honesty, sincerity, but as well with sarcasm. Because they are so glad that it's not in their court. that is in HR.
Mm-hmm.
So you see what I'm doing at the moment. I have decided for 2023 to especially work with C-suite.
Great.
Through a network of mine, and I want to really reach the C-suite people because, who is responsible for the results? It's C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
And to actually make sure that a new awareness is born in terms of, hey, we do have to get the people centrism into our lines again. Not away from HR, but with HR. It should be a hand-in-hand thing,
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the D&I, all these new creative positions, it's pretty much the same. Managers who I know, they say, we welcome these new initiatives very much. And then they say, honestly, how much it will change, we don't know. We are just glad it's not us who have to do it.
Interesting.
Simply.
Interesting. So,
but it's so important that the awareness finally gets to the corporate level. Absolutely.
Oh, yes. I totally agree. It's interesting when you think about the types of organizations that are out there. There are tech startups, there are privately owned companies, there are bootstrap companies. And although there are different types of organizations, and they raise money differently, they become profitable differently, they sell different goods, there is that same approach to people and business. You have to drive a profit, or you have to reach your goal, whatever. If it's a nonprofit organization, you have to achieve some objective, and you need people to get there. So it's really, truly a matter of figuring out that balance. And I agree. I think this is a hand-in-hand situation. I mean, I could never imagine not being in HR, but I also love people management and leadership. And there aren't many opportunities for HR leaders to actually be leaders, people leaders. There are I think we actually spoke about this. There are tons and tons, and really the majority of HR roles are probably individual contributor roles. So these are individuals impacting at an organizational or team level, depending on their experience and positioning in the HR team. But you think about that, and there's a huge transition that has to happen if you do become a people leader within HR, because you could very successfully help to coach and train and develop leaders outside of HR. But then you could be a people leader yourself and be really terrible at it because you haven't had the experience, you haven't had the training, and people just assume because you're in HR that you're going to be good at it. And that is just so incorrect. We are, at the end of the day, also employees ourselves. So how do we get the same coaching, training, development, et cetera, to be successful as people leaders? And some of the challenges that I've seen in having many managers throughout my career is that sometimes those leaders who go from HR individual contributors to HR people managers or people leaders, they are there toward the end of their career or after many years of experience. And sometimes when you go through and I certainly don't want to generalize, but I can only speak from my own experience. Sometimes when you go through your entire career not really needing to confront that you haven't managed people, it's hard to be told that you are not doing such a great job of it, or you need to change, or you have to learn, because you go through your entire career as an individual contributor supporting people to lead better. Mm-hmm. And you think on paper that you'd be good at it, but it just doesn't work that way. So for anyone listening who is in HR, I guess, Markus, why don't you share what is an anecdote there? If someone does want to be a people leader, how do they swallow their pride, embrace feedback, embrace the awareness, self-awareness that maybe they don't have all the answers for themselves, and also confront potentially the fear of not being so great right off the bat at leading people?
I believe that's actually where it starts, swallowing the pride. I believe that is a really good start. And then in the end, I believe it actually starts with the awareness that no one is born a people leader. Mm. And I believe if these two steps have been taken, I believe the groundwork for learning how to become a good people leader is laid. Literally, swallow the pride and accept and acknowledge no one is born a people leader.
I love that.
And then it's like learning like everything else, right?
Yes.
You see, what I really love about my own work is I'm a sounding board to the people I work with, and especially in the C-suite level. So many of my clients, they tell me, Markus, let's be honest, at the end of the day, I am on my own, especially CEOs. Yes, I do have my C-suite colleagues, but it's not the same. And that's actually why I decided to do this initiative in 2023, because all the CEOs I've been working with said the same thing. I need a sounding board and I need a sparring partner. And you see, what's actually really interesting about something which you said before, Tracy, when I've been thinking back to this company I mentioned before, there were 7 C-suite positions. 6 of them alternated all the time. CEO became CFO, CFO became COO, COO became CIO. One position never got alternated. Guess which one? HR.
There you go.
HR.
Yeah.
That's
I was
telling,
going
right?
to say COO because I was thinking of the operations, but actually, no, it makes so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah. CEO of us was the former COO. COO was CIO. COO was CFO. Because you see, interesting enough, if someone studies and let's say acquires an MBA, they basically have what it takes for management. But HR is the only position where those 6 said, nope, we don't touch that. We don't touch that. It's a hot iron, which we don't want to be burned by. So that was surprising to me. All 6 alternated all the time, but HR never alternated. And I believe that would be the answer, that HR managers actually do become people managers, even just for a short time, or, always again in different departments. Because especially, unfortunately, in HR, I experienced this silo thing. I don't think this term ivory tower comes from nowhere, right? Very often we actually have been in the ivory tower, we've been in the top floor. And as I said, you rarely found me there because I thought, gosh, if I actually come here, I want to be, as you did before, in retail on the floor,
Yeah. The ivory tower is a cold, dark room.
It is. Yeah. And surprisingly, not many managers showed up there, actually.
Yeah. Right.
I remember they showed up when they resigned.
Yeah.
And then it was a little bit too late.
Yeah. This is really interesting. I want to share a story, a personal story, and then I want to kind of pivot to a different question for you. So this personal story, when I was thinking about the success and the challenges and the fear associated with going from an individual contributor role to a people manager role, so much of the ability for someone to learn, regardless of whether they're in HR or not, so much of the ability for someone to learn and acquire new skills is their ability to let their guard down, swallow their pride, and embrace potentially failure and really just kind of lean into it and ditch this idea that there's something to prove. Now, I am someone that has struggled with that my entire life. I have always felt like there was something to prove, and I don't know where it comes from, but and something to dissect with a therapist later on, probably. But I share this anecdote. I don't know if you are into baseball or any American sport for that matter, but in baseball, hitting is a huge part of being a successful player. You could be an amazing infielder, outfielder, player, a teammate, but if you can't hit, you're not going to be that great. And I played competitive softball my entire life through high school. And it took over my life. I played year round on multiple teams. I was a catcher my entire life. And so when you're a catcher, you're calling pitches. You're really in control of another thing that we could probably dissect at a later time, but you're really in control of everything that's happening on the field. And I was a great catcher. You put me in a position of needing to control something, I'm going to do a great job at it. But I share this because there was a moment, I think it might have been on my travel team, which is super competitive in high school. We were traveling around, and I must have been going into my senior year, and I was like, if I can really hit, I'm going to be like, there's going to be no question. Maybe I'll play in college. It was just like all I could think about. And I just had this perspective of, I need to prove this. I need to prove this. I need to prove this. And I didn't have to focus so much on my catching. That was like, I did that in my sleep, but it was my hitting that I always kind of struggled with. And every game I was striking out swinging. Every single game. I was so angry at myself. And my coaches, my hitting coaches, my teammates were like, you just have to relax. You gotta relax. You gotta get up to the plate, and you know what pitch they're gonna throw. You can anticipate it. You've seen them play. You've been playing these girls for years and years and years. But I couldn't get out of my head. I was so focused on I have to hit. I had to prove this to myself and to others. And I was so sick of failing that there was one game. I think it was the second game of a doubleheader. I was sick and tired of it, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to relax. I'm just going to listen to everybody and relax. And what did I do? I hit a triple, and I brought in 2 RBIs, and I'll never forget that. It was the best game of my life. And hitting that triple, I was like, wait, what? What did I just do? I made it to third base. It was incredible. But I reflected on that, and I still reflect on this more than 10 years later, that it was because I listened. It was because I stopped focusing on what I needed to do or what I wanted to do, and more so I stayed focused on what I had to release from my thoughts and what I had to kind of just enable myself to do. And to fail to get there was really important. So I know softball is different than HR, but it's a team sport. We're all relying on one another. But I think about this actually often in my own career, wanting and really appreciating being a people leader and wanting to be the best people leader that I can be. That so much of that is really letting your guard down, letting people give you feedback to enable your success, and failing potentially in the process, but that swallowing your pride, forgetting that you have something to prove because you really don't, you just have to enable growth, that's really where it kind of all comes to fruition. So for me, it took softball. It took a lot of failure. Oh my gosh. So
amazing story.
Oh,
So when you let go, it actually happened, right?
Yep.
When you got fed up of being in control, it actually happened.
Yep.
And you see, you hit the ball. And managers think they have to hit people. They are living organisms. Once they start to understand that an employee can't be forced.
Right.
Motivation is what drives me. And once they actually let go of their own perceptions and their own beliefs and start opening up themselves, believing, okay, I've tried it 10 years this way. If I do it another year, it probably won't change much. So let's try another approach.
Right.
And it really starts with what you did. I assume you've been breathing and then you just hit, right?
Yeah. I was just like, screw this.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it comes down to, because you see, like, if you are so tense and you want to hit it, right? You want to hit the home run. That's actually, I assume that was the goal, right?
I had never hit a triple in my entire life. I was like, man, couldn't we have just gone a little bit further?
No, I always love to go to Fenway Park when I'm in Boston with my family there. So yeah,
that's
I can
great.
relate. I can relate a little bit. Yeah, I've seen some amazing games. But to get back to HR, I believe it really comes down to understanding I am not always in charge. I am not always in control. And the beauty is I don't have to be. I don't have to be. And as I said before, we are working with living organisms. And I believe where we probably should start is rethinking the term human resources management. Because think about for a second what we're actually doing if we say human resources management.
And we're managing the resources for people.
And we're taking the human away
Yep.
out of the whole equation and say, you know what? The human is, you're a resource. You're a human resource.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, it could be lamps, it could be tires, it could be whatever, you know. What do we do with robots, right?
Mm-hmm.
We manage robotic resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it actually really has to start with a shift in our minds. Because human resources management pretty much goes into management. Like if you're a manager, you have the human resources aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually want to be a good leader, it has to go beyond that. And I believe that's where HR has to do its job as well. Starting to rethink that human resources management aspect.
Yeah.
Because I never liked to be called the human resources manager. Definitely not when I was to become a human resources director. I thought like,
Yeah. When you think about it enough, you're like, that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. And you see, that's where when I've been teaching this topic, that's when it dawned on me, gosh, there is not much romanticism in the whole game at all.
Right.
Because, you know, I think I told you that anecdote as well. I had a conversation with that CEO mentioned, and I said to him, look, we've been able to prevent 10 top managers within 1 year from leaving the company. And what he said was shocking. He said, Markus, I'm so sorry to tell you, but this is not your job. Please do your job. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'll show you. This is the turnaround rate in our industry, 15 point something %. We are very much average. So please start focusing on things that really matter. And that was the time when I decided I have to leave HR.
Wow.
Yeah, that's when I became a consultant because, you know, I had this conversation with my then human resources director, and I created a human resources management program, showed it to her in a private audience, and she looked at it, smiled and said, Markus, you're absolutely spot on. But I tell you, you will have to leave HR. You will have to leave our company because this will not be accepted from our in-house people. And that was the final for me to leave
the
HR.
Catalyst, right?
Yes, literally the catalyst. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I first of all, I can't even believe that we've managed to cover such an important topic in really focusing on like the keys here in such a short period of time, because I think that this is something that you probably teach in a full year. And it's a topic that you can really break down consistently. I mean, things are constantly changing. The world is changing. The employee population is changing. There's so many things that can continue to be catalysts for changes within HR and business as well. And I certainly, I love my HR career. I know that there are a ton of listeners who are probably like, well, I don't really know that I want to leave HR, but I want to be able to do all of the things that Markus is talking about that I would, as of today, maybe need to leave HR to do. So, I certainly want to leave this podcast with an awareness that there is an ability to make changes at an HR level. It just depends on what those changes are. At some level, you do have to sacrifice that team impact if you're in HR. And I have felt that sacrifice. I knew I made that sacrifice when I became an HR director. You just start managing higher level things and impacting different levels of leadership. And if you're okay with that, if you're okay impacting at an organizational level, at an executive level, and sometimes your impact takes a lot longer to feel. then it's okay to continue with your HR career. And hopefully, and Markus, I'll pass it to you also, whether you agree or disagree. I won't even say hopefully, because you can disagree on this podcast, and in a safe space. But the other thing is that sometimes there are HR positions that you think you're in HR, but you're not even touching the employee population directly. So there does have to be an awareness that HR is not exactly as directly influential on people as management is. It is, however, directly influential on management, or it can be. It can be directly influential on the organizational development, which therein impacts people, but it's a much more indirect way. And it takes a lot more energy and a lot more attention and a lot more focus to actually directly or then directly impact someone, because it's through programs, it's through other things. So what are your thoughts on that? What would you say to someone who's like, don't crush my dreams right now, Tracy and Markus, I want to stay in HR. I've committed all of this time and energy. I don't want to leave. Don't let me leave. What do you say to that person who wants to impact people, but also wants to remain in HR?
You see, this question really touches my heart, and I'm really emotional now, because I believe you touched on it when you said impacting managers or leaders, helping them lead and manage, And can you imagine how much I would love to work with HR departments and not have to go around them directly in management? Because it would be so much easier to work with HR because they understand the pain points. With management, I often have to teach them first and educate them first, which takes time. So I believe if someone is really interested in doing what you just said, staying in HR, but actually having an impact, I would honestly be more than happy to even just have a quick conversation with that person, because it doesn't take so much, Like if someone listened to our conversation, they understand it's doable. And you see, my understanding was always, Tracy, if what I teach, a 15-year-old doesn't understand, then it's too complicated. And it's actually us human beings who make everything so damn complicated and complex.
Right.
It wouldn't be. And it does start with swallowing your pride. So I believe if someone has that deep desire to really learn what this management by walking around means, really becoming a business partner to the managers, I believe that's where it starts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure I know many of those HR who actually have exactly done that. They decided after they listened to my story and said, you know what, that touches somehow something in me, something deep.
Right.
And I want to give it a go. I want to give it a chance. So
that's amazing.
No, I highly recommend to do that.
That's awesome. I think this is a perfect place to say thank you so much for your insights and your challenging of the status quo. I think this is where we grow, when we think differently, when we are challenged in our beliefs and our thoughts and the way that things work as we know it. That's when we can start to build a different skill set and muscle for a new way of thinking. And so I really appreciate your time. I appreciate that you shared your wisdoms with us. And so given that there might be folks who want to reach out, where can people find you? And of course, I will have this in the show notes as well.
Thank you. So there are two ways to reach out to me. One of them is LinkedIn. It's Markus Neukom, and I just spell it out. It's MarkusNeukom. So it's MarkusNeukom. I believe I'm pretty much the only one on LinkedIn. You'll find me there very immediate. And the other thing is my website. It's the same. It's MarkusNeukom.com. And on the website, I have the possibility for someone to book a call, 20 minutes with me, where we can just discuss and see where things go from there.
Amazing.
But thank you so much for having me on your show. It was a true pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you so much. And if things change in this landscape, let's get you back on and talk about this some more. Or even if things don't change and we have an obligation here to expand on some of the things that we've spoken about already, let's discuss in 2023. I really appreciate your time, and I know that the listeners are going to love this episode.
I'd love to. Thank you very much.